Billionaire insults black janitor. Then she says one word that leaves him speechless. What if, in a single moment, the words you choose could shift the course of your life forever, transforming your struggles into opportunities, and your silence into a powerful voice that others can no longer ignore? Tasha Simmons pushed her cleaning cart through the glass-paneled lobby of Wright Tower, the hum of the early morning city filtering through the towering windows. At 29, her life was a delicate balancing act. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing floors and wiping down desks, moved with precision as she polished the brass fixtures. The scent of lemon cleaner clung to her navy blue uniform, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer perfumes that filled the air around her. Tasha's life hadn't always been this way. Growing up in a cramped apartment in one of Atlanta's roughest neighborhoods, she'd watched her single mother, Loretta, work 2 jobs to keep her and her younger brother, Miles, fed. Loretta's mantra was simple: work hard, Tasha. Ain't nobody gonna hand you nothing. Those words stuck with her, even now, 5 years after her mother's death from a sudden heart attack. At 24, Tasha had become Miles's guardian, trading her dreams of starting a small cleaning business for the stability of a janitor's paycheck. Miles was 16 now, a lanky teenager with their mother's sharp wit and a knack for getting into trouble. Tasha's days revolved around keeping him on the straight and narrow, making sure he went to school, stayed out of fights, and didn't fall into the traps that had claimed so many kids in their neighborhood. Her shifts at Wright Tower were long, often stretching into the night, but every dollar she earned went toward rent, groceries, and the occasional pair of sneakers for Miles. Her own dreams? They lived in a notebook tucked under her mattress, filled with sketches of a logo for Simmons Sparkle, her imagined cleaning empire. The tenants of Wright Tower rarely noticed her. To them, Tasha was just part of the scenery, a woman in a uniform, blending into the background like the potted plants she dusted. Sometimes, she'd catch a glance from a suited executive, but it was never kind. It was the kind of look that said, "You don't belong here." Tasha had learned to swallow the sting of those glances, but they never stopped hurting. She was black, she was poor, and to them, she was invisible. But Tasha wasn't invisible to herself. She knew her worth, even if the world didn't. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and Patrick Wright stepped into the lobby. At 42, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. His tailored charcoal suit hugged his broad shoulders, and his steel-gray eyes scanned the room with the precision of a predator. Patrick was the billionaire founder of Wright Tech, a company that had revolutionized AI-driven automation, making him one of the richest men in the South. His face was a fixture in magazines, his name synonymous with power. But to those who worked for him, he was something else entirely: cold, ruthless, and utterly unapproachable. Patrick owned Wright Tower, a gleaming monument to his success, and he made unannounced visits to ensure everything was up to his exacting standards. His employees whispered about his temper, about the way he'd fire someone for a single mistake or dismiss an idea with a cutting remark. To Patrick, the world was a machine, and he was its engineer. People were cogs, replaceable, expendable. That morning, he was in a foul mood. A deal with a European tech firm had fallen through, costing him millions, and he was itching to take it out on someone. As he strode through the lobby, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, his eyes landed on Tasha. She was wiping down a glass table, her movements quick and practiced. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled from a long shift, and a strand of her braided hair had slipped free from her bun. To Patrick, she was a flaw in his perfect machine. "Hey you!" Patrick barked, his voice slicing through the quiet lobby. Tasha froze, her rag hovering over the table. She turned to face him, her heart thudding. She'd seen Patrick before, always from a distance, but this was the first time he'd spoken to her. "Yes, sir," she said, keeping her tone polite but firm. Her mother had taught her to hold her head high, no matter who she was talking to. Patrick's lips curled into a sneer. "This table's smudged. You call this clean? People like you don't belong in a place like this. You're just a janitor. Know your place." The words hit Tasha like a slap. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her pulse hammering in her ears. "People like you." She knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about her job, it was about her skin, her background, her very existence in his pristine world. The lobby seemed to shrink around her, the gleaming marble and glass mocking her presence. Tasha's hands trembled, but she clenched them around her rag, forcing herself to stay calm. She wanted to scream, to tell him he had no right to talk to her like that. But the fear of losing her job, the only thing keeping her and Miles afloat, kept her silent. She lowered her eyes, hating herself for it, and nodded. "I'll fix it, sir." Patrick scoffed, already turning away. "Make it quick," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't have time for incompetence." Tasha stood rooted to the spot, her chest tight with a mix of anger and shame. She could still hear the echo of his words. Just a janitor. They were a knife, twisting into every sacrifice she'd made, every dream she'd buried. She thought of her mother, who'd worked herself to death for her kids. She thought of Miles, who looked up to her to be strong. And she thought of herself, her worth, her dignity, her fire. As Patrick reached the glass doors, something in Tasha snapped. She wasn't going to let this man walk away thinking he'd broken her. She straightened, her shoulders squaring, and her voice cut through the lobby like a blade. "Enough." The word was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of struggle. It was a declaration, a line in the sand. The lobby went silent, the hum of the city outside fading to nothing. Patrick stopped, his hand on the door. Slowly he turned, his eyes locking onto Tasha's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Tasha's gaze was steady, unflinching, her brown eyes burning with a fire Patrick had never seen before. She wasn't just a janitor in that moment, she was a force, undeniable and unapologetic. Patrick, for all his wealth and power, felt something shift inside him. He was used to people cowering before him, bending to his will. But this woman, this janitor, had stopped him cold with a single word. Patrick didn't respond. He couldn't. For the first time in years, he was at a loss for words. He pushed through the doors and disappeared into the morning rush, but Tasha's voice stayed with him. Enough. It echoed in his mind, a challenge to everything he thought he knew. Over the next few weeks, Patrick found himself watching Tasha. Not in a creepy way, but with a kind of reluctant curiosity. He noticed the way she moved through the building, her head held high despite the dismissive glances from tenants. He saw her joking with the security guard, her laughter bright and genuine. He overheard her talking to another janitor about her brother, about how she was saving for his college fund. Slowly, the image of just a janitor began to crumble. Patrick had built his empire on the belief that people were either winners or losers, and he'd always seen himself as the former. But Tasha was something else entirely. She wasn't chasing power or wealth, she was fighting for something bigger. Survival. Family. Dignity. Things Patrick had never had to fight for. Her strength, her quiet resilience, made him question the way he'd lived his life. For the first time, he felt small. One evening, as Tasha was finishing her shift, a security guard approached her. "Mr. Wright wants to see you in his office," he said, his tone neutral but curious. Tasha's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen Patrick since that day in the lobby, and she'd half expected to be fired for speaking out. She followed the guard to the top floor, where Patrick's office overlooked the Atlanta skyline. The room was all glass and steel, cold and imposing, just like the man himself. Patrick stood behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Miss Simmons," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit." Tasha sat, her hands folded in her lap, her guard up. She wasn't about to let him intimidate her again. "I owe you an apology," Patrick said, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "What I said to you that day was wrong. I was wrong. I've been watching you, and I've seen how hard you work. How much you care. You're not just a janitor, you're someone with potential. I'd like to offer you a job at Right Tech. A management role. You'd be overseeing operations for one of our facilities. It's a chance to show what you're capable of." Tasha blinked, stunned. A job at Right Tech? It was the kind of opportunity she'd never even dreamed of. The salary would be enough to move her and Miles to a better neighborhood, to pay for his college, to start building the life she'd always wanted. But as she looked at Patrick, she saw the same man who'd dismissed her so easily. Could she trust him? Was this just a way to ease his guilt? That night, Tasha sat at her kitchen table, Miles asleep in the next room. She stared at her notebook, the pages filled with her dreams for Simmons Sparkle. Patrick's offer was tempting, but it felt like a betrayal of everything she'd fought for. She wasn't just a janitor, she was Tasha Simmons, a woman who'd clawed her way through life with nothing but her own strength. She didn't need Patrick Wright to validate her. The next day, she returned to his office. Patrick looked expectant, almost smug, as if he assumed she'd jump at the chance. But Tasha had other plans. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Wright," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not here to work for you. I'm here to make a difference. I'll take your offer, but on my terms. I want you to fund a youth mentorship program in my community. $1 million. It'll give kids like my brother a chance to dream bigger than I ever could. That's my price." Patrick's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. No one ever negotiated with Patrick Wright. But Tasha wasn't just anyone. After a long silence, Patrick nodded. "Done," he said. $1 million for the program. But I want you to run it. You've got the vision, Ms. Simmons. I trust you to make it work." Tasha didn't smile, but she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd turned an insult into an opportunity, not just for herself, but for her entire community. Over the next year, the Simmons Youth Mentorship Program took shape, offering tutoring, job training, and scholarships to kids from Atlanta's poorest neighborhoods. Tasha became a local hero, her story spreading through the city like wildfire. She didn't take Patrick's job, but she did forge a partnership with him, one built on mutual respect rather than power. Patrick, for his part, began to change. He started listening to his employees, questioning his own biases, and investing in programs that uplifted the people he'd once dismissed. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And it all started with one word: enough. Tasha never forgot that moment in the lobby. It was the moment she'd found her voice, the moment she'd refused to be invisible. As she stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the mentorship program, Miles by her side, she felt her mother's spirit with her. She'd made it, not by climbing someone else's ladder, but by building her own. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, she knew Simmons Sparkle was still waiting. One day, she'd make that dream a reality, too. But for now, she'd done enough. More than enough.